The ballroom at the National Governors Conference in Washington shimmered with chandeliers and political tension. Governors from across the country mingled among marble columns and velvet drapes, exchanging smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. But everyone knew why the cameras were really there. Texas Governor Greg Abbott and California Governor Gavin Newsom were scheduled to appear on the same public panel for the first time. As the audience settled into their seats, Gavin Newsom stepped up to the microphone first. He flashed his signature confident smile, the one that usually came right before a punchline, and glanced across the stage toward Greg Abbott, who had just rolled into position beside his podium. Newsom didn't even wait for the moderator to finish the introduction. "You know," he said casually, tone dripping with sarcasm, "some of us travel the country tackling real national problems. Others," he paused, looking directly at Abbott's wheelchair, "seem more comfortable sitting still, and letting the rest of us do the hard work." The room gasped. Some nervous laughs broke out from the crowd, the kind that come from people who aren't sure whether to laugh or recoil. A few of Newsom's staffers chuckled, convinced their boss had landed a clever jab. Abbott didn't react. He placed both hands calmly on the sides of his wheelchair and stared at Newsom with a level, quiet gaze. No smile. No frown. Just a stare, cool and unblinking, that made the room suddenly feel colder. The moderator tried to move the discussion forward, but everyone sensed something had shifted. A line had been crossed. And Greg Abbott was about to respond. "Governor Newsom," he said, voice low but cutting clean through the silence, "you're right about one thing, some of us don't move around much. That's because we're too busy holding the line while others run away from responsibility." Newsom's grin vanished. Abbott didn't raise his voice. He didn't even blink. He just sat there, perfectly still, and delivered a single sentence that sent a chill through the room. "You call it sitting still. Texans call it standing your ground." The audience fell absolutely silent. And for the first time all night, Gavin Newsom had nothing to say. The moderator tried to regain control of the panel, but all eyes stayed locked on the two governors. Gavin Newsom shifted his weight slightly, as if trying to shake off the blow. His confident smirk returned, but it didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. "That's a nice line, Governor," Newsom said, trying to laugh it off, "but if standing your ground means refusing to move forward with the rest of the country, then maybe Texas is just stuck." A few polite chuckles came from the California delegation, but the room was far more subdued than before. Abbott tilted his head just slightly, eyes never leaving Newsom. "Stuck?" Abbott repeated softly. "California has people fleeing the state in record numbers. Businesses relocating. Families uprooting. If Texas is stuck, Governor," he paused, letting the silence build, "why is everyone trying to move here?" A low wave of applause rolled across the room, soft at first, then growing louder as more people joined in. Newsom's eyebrows tightened. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but Abbott gently lifted a hand, stopping him before he could start. "You like to mock where I sit," Abbott continued, voice steady as stone. "But from this chair, Governor, I've protected a border your federal friends ignore, created more jobs than your entire state, and stood up for people who work every single day without asking Washington for permission." The room burst into applause, louder and longer this time. The moderator tried to cut in, but it was too late. Gavin Newsom wasn't smiling anymore. He looked frozen, not angry, not embarrassed, just caught. As if Abbott's words had pinned him to the floor and left him with nowhere to move. And Abbott? He didn't celebrate. He didn't even blink. He simply folded his hands in his lap, and waited for Newsom to find a way out. Which, at that moment, he couldn't. For a full 10 seconds, Gavin Newsom didn't speak. The applause faded slowly, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable silence that settled over the room like fog. You could almost hear people shifting in their seats, waiting to see if the California governor would fire back, or retreat. Finally, Newsom straightened his suit jacket and leaned toward the microphone, forcing a thin smile. "Well, I guess Texas likes to keep things simple, he said, trying to inject humor back into his voice. Maybe that's why your governor still believes walls solve border problems instead of smart policy. He tried to laugh, but this time, no one joined him. Abbott didn't react. He simply turned his head, looking out across the room. Simple doesn't mean weak, Governor, he replied. It means knowing who you are and what you stand for. Texans don't build walls to keep people out, we build them to protect what we've built. A quiet, "That's right," came from somewhere in the audience. Then another. Then a few soft claps, growing louder with each second until the entire ballroom was filled with applause again, this time from governors, staffers, and even a few reporters. Newsom's smile slipped. He glanced around the room, clearly surprised by the reaction, or lack of one. His confidence had carried him into the panel like a performer stepping onto stage, and now the audience was no longer on his side. Abbott leaned forward slightly, voice calm but sharpened like a blade. You can laugh at my chair. You can take shots at Texas. But understand this, when you mock the person who refuses to move, what you're really mocking is the man who refuses to back down. The crowd went dead silent again, and then erupted. Newsom didn't move. He didn't blink. For a moment, he looked like he'd forgotten how. And for everyone watching, the message was clear. He started the joke. Abbott finished it. The moderator leaned toward his mic, clearly trying to shift the discussion back to policy, but the mood in the room had already changed. This wasn't a panel anymore. It was a reckoning. Gavin Newsom took a slow breath and tried, once more, to regain control. You talk about strength, Governor Abbott, but real strength is adapting. It's progressing. You're proud of standing still, but maybe that's why Texas is always behind California on technology, climate, and innovation. He threw in a little shrug, as if the point were obvious. Abbott didn't move. His face didn't change. But when he spoke again, his voice carried the kind of weight that immediately drew the room in. Behind you, he said quietly. Texas leads the nation in job growth, energy production, and business relocation. California leads the nation in people leaving. A stunned silence, then several governors actually laughed out loud. Abbott turned slightly toward the crowd, as if speaking for them all now. We may not chase headlines. We may not host Hollywood fundraisers. But we take care of our own. And if you think that makes us behind, then you clearly don't understand what real leadership looks like. The applause hit so hard and so long that even the moderator leaned back in his chair and stopped trying to interrupt. Gavin Newsom, normally composed, polished, media-trained, just stared. No comeback. No clever line. Just a tight jaw and a hollow look in his eyes, as if Abbott's words had pinned him to that stage and left him nowhere to run. And Greg Abbott simply sat there, calm, steady, unflinching, like a man who didn't need to move. Because he'd already won. The air in the ballroom had shifted entirely in Abbott's favor. Every eye was locked on Gavin Newsom, waiting for him to respond, waiting to see if he had anything left to throw. But Newsom stayed silent. He looked down briefly, then straightened his papers in a move that was more nervous habit than confident gesture. The moderator saw the opening and began to speak, but Abbott lifted a hand slightly, just enough to hold the room, and the moderator stopped mid-sentence. Abbott turned back toward Newsom and spoke softly, but his words landed like a hammer. Governor Newsom, you came here tonight to mock me, and mock Texas. Maybe you thought people would laugh with you. But what you may not understand is this: Texans don't laugh at their challenges. They overcome them. The room was silent again. No coughs, no whispers, nothing. Just Abbott's calm voice echoing off the marble. You joked about me sitting still, and you were right. I am sitting. And yet somehow, you're the one who can't move. It hit like a lightning bolt. A few people in the crowd literally gasped before the applause exploded. Governors on both sides of the aisle sat back in their chairs, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others whispering, "Wow." Newsom didn't even look up. His shoulders fell just slightly, as if the line had broken something loose inside him. The confident posture he carried onto the stage was gone. He remained perfectly still. And for the first time all night, Greg Abbott didn't have to say anything else. Because there was nothing left to say, the panel ended almost immediately after that final line. The moderator, clearly sensing there was no recovering the original tone, thanked both governors and dismissed the session. Chairs scraped the floor as people stood, still buzzing from what they'd witnessed. Gavin Newsom gathered his notes in silence and walked off the stage without making eye contact with anyone. His staff followed close behind, whispering frantically. Reporters tried shouting questions, but Newsom didn't break stride. His face was stiff, not angry, just stunned. It was the look of someone who walked in expecting applause, and left hearing a completely different sound. Backstage, Abbott rolled through a narrow hallway, greeted by a small group of Texas staffers and fellow governors. One of them shook his head in disbelief. "Governor, you didn't just beat him. You froze him in place." Abbott offered a small, understated smile. "That's what happens when people confuse strength with motion." His communications director walked beside him, phone already buzzing with alerts. "Sir, we're trending in every state. Clips of that final line are everywhere, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. People are calling it the moment Newsom got stuck." Abbott didn't even look at the phone. "Good. That means the message landed." A young intern stepped forward nervously, holding a Texas flag pin. "My family's from El Paso, Governor. We watched the live stream. They told me to say, thank you for saying what needed to be said." Abbott paused, took the pin, and gave a simple nod. "Tell them I said we're just getting started." And with that, he rolled toward the exit, calm, composed, and completely unshaken, while the sound of whispered praise followed him down the hall. Across town, the California delegation regrouped in a private conference room. Laptops were open, phones were buzzing, and the air was thick with disbelief. No one had expected Gavin Newsom to walk into that panel and walk out bruised, but that's exactly what had happened. Newsom sat at the head of the table, eyes fixed on the screen in front of him as headlines refreshed in real time. Abbott silences Newsom with brutal one-liner. Texas governor turns mockery into national moment. Newsom's joke backfires in front of entire conference. A communications aide broke the silence. "Governor, we can put out a statement. We'll say the panel got off topic and turned into political grandstanding. We'll accuse Abbott of disrespect." Another aide spoke, her tone more cautious. "Sir, the problem is, people watched it. They saw everything. The clips are everywhere. They're calling that moment the freeze." Newsom didn't answer. He simply stared at the video clip looping on one of the phones, Abbott sitting silently as applause erupted around him, Newsom frozen mid-response. He finally spoke, voice low. "We're not responding. Not now." His staff exchanged confused looks. "Sir?" Newsom closed his laptop, jaw clenched. "You don't fight a moment like that with a statement. You just wait until people forget." But even as he said the words, he knew, moments like that don't get forgotten. By the next morning, the clip had crossed every platform and political line. It wasn't just conservative media replaying Abbott's final line, it was mainstream outlets, independent creators, even comedy shows. Twitter was flooded with memes. One popular post split the screen, on the left, a still of Newsom mid-smirk. On the right, Abbott's calm expression with the caption, "He's sitting. You're stuck." Another clip on TikTok added dramatic music behind Abbott's final line, and within 12 hours it passed 1 million views. Under the video, a comment with more than 20,000 likes read, "California brought jokes. Texas brought reality." Across the country, radio hosts replayed the moment and then took callers. One truck driver from Arkansas laughed. "Man, I don't even live in Texas, but that made me proud." The moment had become bigger than two governors. It was now a symbol, Texas standing its ground against a polished, coastal politician who thought a cheap joke would land. Back in Austin, Abbott's staff watched the reaction surge hour by hour. A senior advisor refreshed a dashboard showing nationwide engagement and shook his head. "Governor, this isn't just trending. It's turning into a rallying cry." Abbott looked up from a briefing, calmly. "Good. Because the next part isn't a line on a stage, it's action." He leaned forward. "Line up a border visit. Reach out to the deputies in Eagle Pass and Val Verde. And call the media. If they want to talk about Texas now, we'll give them something real to talk about." 2 days after the conference, the Texas border town of Eagle Pass looked more like the center of the country than a quiet rural community. Camera crews lined the streets. Reporters from every major network had flown in, hoping to capture the next chapter of the moment that had already gone viral. Greg Abbott stood at a makeshift podium placed just outside a local ranch. Behind him were a sheriff, 2 border deputies, and several ranchers, faces worn by sun, wind, and years of work. No soft lighting. No polished hotel ballroom. Just Texas soil. Abbott spoke plainly. "This is where the jokes stop," he said. "This is where real leadership begins. While some governors travel the country poking fun at states they don't understand, we stand right here and face what they refuse to see." He pointed toward the ranch behind him. "Families live here. Children grow up here. And when that's threatened, Texas doesn't laugh, Texas takes action." The sheriff stepped to the microphone and thanked Abbott not just for words, but for showing up. A border deputy followed, sharing a story about a night when their unit ran out of manpower and the state stepped in. The press ate it up, not because it was sensational, but because it was real. That afternoon, the clips of Abbott standing alongside local law enforcement began circulating online. People didn't see a politician recovering from a debate moment, they saw a governor doubling down on the very values he had defended on stage. Across the country, comments poured in. This is why Abbott sat still. He was already standing taller than everyone else. As the sun began to set over the dusty fields of Eagle Pass, Greg Abbott stepped forward for one final remark. The reporters lowered their microphones. Ranchers and officers folded their arms and stood quietly, watching the governor they now knew wouldn't leave them behind. Abbott paused for a moment, looking out across the land behind the cameras, not to impress anyone, but to remind himself why he was here. "Some people think strength means moving fast," he said. "Others think it means talking loud. But here in Texas, strength means one thing, never backing down from what's right." He gestured toward the deputies standing next to him. "When Gavin Newsom tried to make this a joke, he didn't mock me. He mocked every man and woman who risks their life protecting this border. He mocked Texans who get up before sunrise. He mocked families who love this state like a part of their own blood." Abbott's voice didn't rise, it deepened, calm and resolute. "So let this be clear. You can laugh at Texas. You can mock its governor. But when the jokes stop, we'll still be here. Standing our ground." Behind him, someone quietly said, "Amen." A few in the crowd placed their hands over their hearts. Abbott nodded once, not as a show, but as an understanding, then stepped back from the microphone. The moment wasn't explosive. It wasn't dramatic. It was something stronger. A simple statement to the rest of America. Texas doesn't move to please others. Texas stands. And in that quiet, steady firmness, Greg Abbott had already won. In the end, Gavin Newsom didn't lose a debate. He ran into something he didn't understand. He thought a quick joke and a confident smile would be enough to put Greg Abbott in his place. He thought Texas was just another punchline. But that's the mistake people always make with Texas. Because Texans don't care how loud you laugh. They care how long you stand. Greg Abbott didn't rise from his chair. He didn't raise his voice. He simply spoke the truth, and let the weight of it do the rest. And in that moment, Gavin Newsom didn't just run out of words. He ran out of ground to stand on. Some leaders move. Others hold the line. Texas remembers the difference.